Good morning. Welcome to Scottsdale 360, a virtual learning series focusing on the people, policies, and programs that shape our city government and the community we serve. My name is Holly Walter. I'm your host today, and I would like to kick things off with a question to the group. And as you answer that question, I will explain what Scottsdale 360 is. This program was born out of a need to continue to engage our citizens and our staff despite COVID-19 and the many challenges it presented. So it does seem fitting to end our series on the topic of emergency preparedness. So today we are lucky to have our city's emergency manager, Troy Lutrick, who will discuss several aspects of emergency preparedness and will give us a brief overview of Scottsdale's response to COVID-19 as an organization. So without further delay, we will get started. But first, hopefully everyone's had a chance to answer the poll question. Let's take a look at the answer. Looks like, wow, a pretty even split between the number of pandemics since 1918, 4, and 4, and one person guessing 7. The correct answer is actually 5. So, obviously the coronavirus pandemic isn't the first to hit the human civilization. Throughout history, there have been numerous pandemics, others much worse than COVID-19 that claimed the lives of thousands and even millions of people. And ever since humans learned to live in groups, forming communities where they live close to each other, and also due to travel, the world has seen numerous diseases spread. So since 1918, our world has seen the Spanish flu. In 1968, the H3N2 flu pandemic, HIV/AIDS, SARS, and of course, most recently, COVID-19. So that correct answer is C, 5. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin our discussion. I'd like to welcome Troy. And Troy, if you wouldn't mind, let's start off with a quick history of your experience and how long you've been with the city of Scottsdale.
Sure. Good morning, Holly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think we're going to cover some pretty interesting topics today. But my background, I've been with the city for just shy of 3 years. Started here in summer of 2019. Prior to that, I was a firefighter and retired in 2015 and went into emergency management full time. I was paramedic most of my career. I'm still a certified paramedic. This is my 31st year being nationally qualified. And I retired from the city of Glendale. And my last job there, although I did a lot of things throughout my career, my last job there essentially was planning for Super Bowl 49. And I was also heavily involved, deeply involved in planning for Super Bowl 42 in 2008. So I also served on 2 disaster management teams. They're called incident management teams, one for Health and Human Services and another for the Forest Service. And I've done that for 15 years. I was also very fortunate during my career to have been assigned to the State Counterterrorism Center for 5 years full time. So I did Homeland Security for quite a while, and initiated and managed some programs there that started here in the state, and they also went nationwide. And then lastly, I teach for several different organizations, but I teach the Incident Command System, or National Incident Management System, as some would refer to it. That's kind of a global title for it. I teach for the state of Arizona, I teach for FEMA, and I also instruct for USAID overseas. So I've done quite a bit of that. So not only do I do this for a living, but I try to teach others how to do it and to be prepared.
Fantastic. So in a nutshell, we're in good hands and you have a lot of experience, Troy. And you mentioned the Super Bowl, and that's something we may touch on near the end of the presentation, because part of emergency preparedness is being prepared for those large scale events. And obviously Scottsdale hosts many every year, and Super Bowl will be back here in Arizona. And that's something we have teams here at the City of Scottsdale already working on. But let's first start on the topic of pandemics and specifically COVID-19. The city obviously was doing a lot of work behind the scenes throughout the pandemic, but this planning and preparation and what we did as a city began even before shutdowns began happening. This was something on your radar, correct?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. The way this started here for the city was quite interesting. So the emergency managers in the region had been talking about, is this going to come here? Who's next? Do we have any cases in Arizona? And some may remember the first identified case was actually in the city of Tempe. And the emergency manager at the time for ASU called me to say, hey, just to let you know, first patient has occurred here. We've identified who they are. They've been treated. They are following all the protocols. And so I called Chief Shannon, our fire chief, and said, I think we need to be prepared for this. We could be next, or we don't know how quickly or how wide this will spread. And it wasn't 3 days later that we got the call that we had a patient identified in Scottsdale, and both of those had been treated at Scottsdale hospitals. So we immediately stood up an incident management team, and that's one of my specialties. I assembled a group of people from across the city in our leadership, and we started meeting. At that point, we met twice a day, morning and afternoon, every day, 7 days a week, and basically started to assemble the information that we knew, the intelligence we could gather, and try to come up with plans based on, PPE, personal protective equipment, policies that would help keep our employees safe and our citizens safe, and sharing information. So that went on for 720 days, and we met very often and kept everybody in the loop, and just made changes based on that incident management team's decisions and guidance. And it went very well. It actually played out very well for the city, and some organizations that were not as quite as fast on getting that set up and making those decisions struggled a little bit more. So we're very proud of that.
Now, the city was heavily involved too in hosting testing and vaccination clinics. Can you talk about that work? Specifically at Westworld, we hosted vaccinations there with the ability to accommodate very large numbers of people.
Yes, we sure did. That was in combination with the state of Arizona Public Health Department and lots of other partners. Cigna was a major sponsor of that. They were the sponsor of that, so they became the medical aspect of it. But we were open for 9 weeks at Westworld. We gave 25,000 vaccinations there. It was open to the public. It was a walk-in pod or point of distribution. That's what we called it. And people would park in the parking lot outside of the big city tent there, and they'd walk in, register, and get their shot, wait for their 15-minute desired wait time, and then schedule their next shot if they were scheduled, if they hadn't done 2 already, and they'd walk up to the car and drive away. So we operated that for 9 weeks, 7 days a week, and did 25,000 vaccinations. And it went very well. It was a beautiful facility. They did a great job setting it up. And once you walked inside, it was kind of overwhelming with the number of folks that we could handle inside.
Yeah, in fact, that's where I took advantage of receiving a vaccination, and it was really a pretty easy process. I was in and out of there in, gosh, probably less than an hour. So it was great to have that set up. Now, where do we stand today in terms of COVID-19 and the city's management of the pandemic?
So in the incident management process, there's preparation, mitigation. Some of the things we're talking about today is preparation. It's kind of a revolving cycle. And then there's a response, right? Once we knew that COVID was in the United States and it had come to Arizona and eventually into Scottsdale as it impacted all of us, that incident management team started to prepare for those. Actually, prior to the Westworld pod, we had already done one for the Northeast Valley, and it was for healthcare providers in cooperation with the Honor Health. And we drove, it was a drive-through pod, and we had 75,000 healthcare providers come through that site. It was basically at the 101 and I-17 at a Honor Health facility. But there were lots of efforts being put out there because we didn't know a lot. We know a whole lot more now than we did back then. So what the city has done is we stopped meeting weekly because we are in a really good routine and we understand what we need to do moving forward. The truth is that COVID is probably going to be part of our lives for a very long time, probably, possibly indefinitely. As you probably have seen on the news, Omicron versions BA4 and BA5 are the dominant strains that are out there now. They are slightly different. It's the same protein as all of the previous strains that we've seen and talked about, but they are slightly different than the previous ones. So the vaccinations don't, the process of creating a vaccination and packaging it, distributing it, and then getting it out to the public is difficult. It's very difficult. And to compare that, if you think about the influenza, every year we get a flu shot. Well, it's a different strain, and they're trying to anticipate what that strain would be ahead of time. Again, create it, package it, and move it out to the public. And that same thing is now occurring with COVID. And that's an expected process. That is not unexpected at all. So we continue to meet in the recovery phase of that cycle I mentioned a few minutes ago as a team, and we're constantly discussing, are we on the right track? Do we need to do things differently? Is there things we need to add or delete? And we continue to meet to do that. It's just a little bit smaller group to make those decisions. But we continue to keep our eye on it and encourage people to get themselves vaccinated and then stay out of crowds and all of the things that we've taught the public over the last 2.5+ years.
Mm-hmm. And I do know we have seen an increase in numbers recently within Maricopa County. Is there any advice you could provide to those watching today?
All of the same advice exists that we told you 2.5+ years ago. Wash your hands, stay socially distanced, which is determined about 6 feet away from people. Try to stay out of crowds when you can. If you're in those spaces, wear a mask. It helps protect you to some degree, and it also helps protect the people around you if you are contagious but you don't know it, because these symptoms in all of these strains continue to get a little more evasive. They're not quite as obvious, and so if we can avoid spreading it and allow the professionals that are building the vaccines and do all the protective measures that are out there to catch up to it, then we'll all be better off. Fortunately, the hospitalizations are not, hospitals are not being overwhelmed like they were a year and a half ago, where it was very scary. And the symptoms are a little bit milder. Some would argue that they are milder because people have been vaccinated and they're washing their hands more often and doing all of those things. Others might argue that the strains are weakening to some degree, but that's what viruses do. They change and adapt so they can stay alive, and that's why viruses have been around, for very long periods of time. So wash your hands, stay away from people, and get vaccinated, and keep yourself healthy. That's my recommendation.
Okay, and with that, let's move into some other topics of emergency preparedness. Right now, we're in the height of monsoon storms, and wildfires have been a huge concern in our state and other Western states. So what can you share with us about those topics?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Holly. Wildfire is a big concern in Scottsdale. We live in a beautiful area that is also referred to as the Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI. And that means that our houses and structures are built right up against those areas that can burn. And if you remember a couple of summers ago, the Ocotillo fire in the Cave Creek area we lost quite a few structures, and we have very similar fuel types, identical fuel types. It's that we saw there. So the wildland urban interface creates a little bit different of a problem for somewhere like Scottsdale. Now, if you think of downtown Phoenix or downtown New York, the chances of having a wildfire there are zero because they don't have those fuel types like we do. But we live in the desert for a reason, because we love it and we want to protect it. And we have, the preserve, which is, I believe, the second largest preserve in the nation, municipal preserve, and we obviously want to protect that. So wildfire is a big deal to us. We have to think about it. We have to be proactive, and we've done that. We had hired a wildfire expert, basically to. He came out of the Forest Services. Name is Dave Ramirez, and he did this for 30 years. And we hired him to work on some projects and to obtain some grants here in the city. And I'll just give you some statistics. If you drive around up in North Scottsdale, Scottsdale Road, Pima, Hayden, Jomax, all of the streets up there, you'll see that the fuels have been reduced along the sides of the roads. And the purpose of that is not only does it prevent fires from occurring, say a car fire, if your car's on fire, you pull off to the side of the road. Well, that can start a fire that now extends into the neighborhoods of the preserve. Same with chains dragging, they create sparks, cigarette butts being thrown out, those sorts of things. So we thin those fuels along those roads, and it's very obvious if you drive up there now. We obtained $370,000 in grants from the state to help fund to do those projects. In that amount of time, just in the last 6 months, we've done clearing across 14 miles of roadway, 100 acres of mechanical work, meaning they were physically using chainsaws and chippers to take the fuels away and thin them out and raise the limbs of the trees up off the ground, so the small fire in the ground can't go up into the trees and grow larger. 100 acres of that was done. 155 acres of chemical treatment were sprayed, and those chemicals are sprayed after the mechanical treatment with the intent of reducing the non-native species grasses to grow back. We also did 4.5 miles along Scottsdale Road on the west side, which is actually in the city of Phoenix, but we cooperated with Phoenix and got that done. The other advantage of those are it eliminates or it creates a fuel break. So if a fire does start, it gives us a better chance that we can catch the fire and stop it from spreading across the landscape unchecked. And so we've been very successful in that, and we'll continue to do those projects as we move forward. If I could just talk real quick about non-native species grasses, and a really good example for people to think about is if you drive up the I-17 like you're going to Prescott or Flagstaff, and you get up on top of Sunset Point, right when you come up off the top of the hill there, you see nothing but grass, what looks like kind of like a wheat field across that plateau there. That used to be a high desert and have all of the cacti and shrubs and bushes and stuff like we would see around us here, but it's burned so many times that those native species have died off. And what quickly takes over those are those non-native type grasses, buffalo grass and things like that. So we're starting to see that here. And how that relates to us, that's really important, is that they say in California, they don't have a wildfire season anymore, it's year round. Well, a lot of the reason that occurs is because the fires have killed those native species, and now those non-native species grasses take over, and they are very quick to return after fire. Fire does not kill them. But for example, a high exposure heat to a saguaro cactus or a Palo Verde tree or Palo Brea tree, something like that out there, will likely kill those trees, and it takes many, many years for them to grow back. So that's why we're doing all that work. It's really important to us. The other thing that you mentioned is monsoon. Well, if the monsoons come, which is typically starts on in July, and it comes and brings rain, then our chances of wildfire go down. but quite often our monsoons come with dry lightning and no rain, or the lightning is so far out ahead of the storm that the fire starts before the rain actually gets to it. So we've had occurrences around there, occurrences around here that have been caused by dry lightning. So that could be another way that fires can start. And all of these efforts that we're doing now are to either stop those, prevent those, or in our terms, catch them once they start and try to minimize any damage that they do. So the second part of the monsoons is sometimes they come and they're very, very powerful. And we saw that just a few nights ago. There was very heavy damage in East Valley, Mesa, Gilbert, Salt River Indian community. They had extreme damage and lots of people lost power. Straight line winds, downdraft winds, those kinds of things. We hear it called lots of different terms, but those cause a lot of damage, and they also cause flash flooding. And if you remember a few years ago, the casino talking stick had major damage, flooding damage from storms, and all of that is the flash flooding that we're describing. So that can be kind of a secondary effect that people need to consider. If you didn't know, the mountains, the McDowell Mountain Preserve is what they call an alluvial fan. I can barely say that. I certainly can't spell it, but it's essentially a collection point where as rain falls, it funnels down into the washes. And essentially Indian Bend Wash, or Hayden Road to us, is a collection point. It was built on purpose for that, to funnel that water down to the salt and then kind of out of the city. So it's a beautiful park to us most days, but sometimes it becomes a flash flood feature that is built on purpose to do that. So that's kind of the concerns where you combine wildfire and flash flooding, and they kind of happen in the same periods during the year.
Great. Well, let's talk about what we can do as homeowners and residents. I know during monsoon season and when big storms roll in, we get a lot of requests coming into the city for sandbags. What's your philosophy on the use of sandbags or other alternatives for homeowners?
Thanks for asking that. So as we all know, sand is a great filter, right? It's used in lots of different applications to clean things, filter water. It's in our soil. It's certainly part of our ecosystem here. But the fact that it collects debris and things that we don't want to be in water, that's the natural process as it soaks down through the ground, means it also stores those things. So sandbags do the same thing. Sandbags are really designed for heavy flowing water. It's a diversion device. So if you think about the fires that just occurred up in Flagstaff, they're now building, I heard 600,000 sandbags. Those are to divert water away from homes and structures and roads and bridges and things like that. Sandbags are a diversion device. So if the water is flowing, sandbags work pretty well. But as soon as the water becomes stagnant, they immediately soak up whatever is in that water, biohazards, fuels, things we don't even understand unless we were to test those. And so leaving those sit, they actually become a collector of things that now become a hazard to get rid of. So not only are they heavy, right, and hard to move, hard to place, hard to pick up, and then you get rid of them and then need them the next time a storm comes, they are somewhat of a hazard. And throwing them in a trash can, dumping them in a pond or down the gutters in the streets is a really bad idea, because they are concentrated of all that stuff. So there is an alternative to it. There are essentially plastic tubes out there that you can buy at a local hardware store, and you fill them up with your hose, right? You're adding more water, but they act even better. They don't absorb anything. And when you're done, you just empty them. The water goes with where all the other water went, and now you can fold them out, put it in your garage, and reuse them next time. So they're relatively cheap. They're reusable. They're not heavy. You lay them in place, put the water in them, and then empty them before you even pick them up. So there's no chance of people being injured. So that's one of the recommendations we try to get out there, just because of the risks of sand and the things we just discussed.
And those can be found at any home improvement store or Amazon.
Yes.
Okay.
Seen
And that's
them
good
all
to
over
know.
the place. Yes.
Yeah. And, not always too, I know another challenge we face is, it's a courtesy for the city to provide those sandbags. And sometimes, depending on the severity of a storm, we may run out. So it's always good to have that backup in place as a homeowner and be have something to be prepared. What other suggestions can you offer in terms of wildfires and monsoons? What we can do as homeowners and residents in Scottsdale to be prepared for those things?
Well, we talked a lot about that. Wildfire specifically, basically, if you can clear the burnable fuels away from your home or your garage or your shed, anything that has value, we'd like to have a 30-foot buffer. Now, that doesn't mean you need to take all of your plants and get rid of everything within 30 feet of your home, but it does mean get rid of those light fuels that can easily catch fire and then transmit into the larger fuels and now into your home. So we call that a buffer. So a 30-foot zone and anywhere that a vehicle can drive should have those fuels cleared away. For flooding, kind of the same idea. If you live in a flood-prone area, make sure that you have good drainage systems built around your home, even if you haven't flooded in the past, but you know that maybe your neighborhood has or people around you, because the storms seem to get more and more intense. They drop more rain. Sometimes there's a river in the sky, as some weather people will say, and there's more water in the sky waiting to come down than there is on the ground around us. And when those types of storms occur, they can build up a massive amount of water very quickly, and water goes least path of resistance. So try to channel that away from your home. Another important thing to think about is flood insurance. We all know when you purchase a house, they determine whether you're in a flood zone or you're not. If you're in a flood zone, you're required to buy flood insurance. If you're not, it's a choice and you're welcome to do it. People think, well, if a flood's going to come or I know a big storm is coming, then I'll just buy flood insurance at the time. The problem is there's a 30-day waiting period. So if you were to buy flood insurance today, your home is not actually covered for another 30 days. So if you can predict all of that 31 days ahead, that's great. Please call me and let me know so I can let everybody else know. But flood insurance is important to have. It's something to consider, especially in areas like we live, which are around that alluvial fan, and that's why I mentioned it.
Now, in terms of preparedness, I know a program that has been heavily promoted with the state of Arizona, and something that we hope to do within Scottsdale is a Ready, Set, Go, and just teaching residents those steps, what they need to do. And we've seen that in action in the wildfires that just occurred in the Flagstaff area. So can you elaborate on that program and what that means?
Yes, I can. And if I can, I'm going to share my screen here and show you a website that I want you to be aware of. So this is the Arizona Emergency Information Network, and we're going to post some of these sites I'm going to talk about on the screen so you can grab them. But what you're referring to, Holly, is called Ready, Set, Go. And for folks that live in forested areas like Flagstaff or Payson or Prescott, they commonly see Ready, Set, Go messaging. But we don't see it quite as often here in the urban environment like Scottsdale. So what this means is pretty simple. I'm encouraging everyone, and including our employees, but also our public out there, that you should always be ready. Have a ready kit. Have a containers or bags to grab your valuables and know what you're going to take with you at the ready. Then you also need to be ready with the flood diversion devices that we talked about. Be ready with fuel clearing around your home. Be ready with communications plans with your family in case there's some sort of failure in the communication center. Have a meetup place. Have additional food and water that can get you through a short period if that were to be a problem. Just generally have a plan for you and every member of your family, and be ready to take action if necessary. Now that's an everyday status, and we encourage people to think about these things, because it's never good to try to make critical decisions during an emergency. The next step of that is set. And set is basically you would receive emergency notifications. They can be on your telephone, on your cell phone, on the radio. They can be on TV. We're all used to seeing those things. Somewhat similar on your cell phone to an Amber Alert. And you could get a message that says your area is in set. And the next step of that, which we'll talk about in just a minute, is go. So in set, it means start putting your valuables and taking action on the things that you prepared in the ready stage, and get set to go. That's essentially what it means. This is not a very exact science. When those messages go out, they go out via the cell tower system, which does not pick individual phone numbers. It picks locations, similar to Amber Alert. And then there's also the SENS system, Community Emergency Notification System, which is a opt-in, meaning you have to sign up for it, but you could Google CENS.gov and it'll take you right to that site. And that's another older system that can notify you. But again, it's not exact. So if we were to pick a particular neighborhood with very specific geographic boundaries and say this community or this area is in set, that will bleed over into other communities and areas, and it may be not quite as exact as we'd like it to be. But in those messages, you would get some instructions. Typically, it will say, wildfire approaching. This particular community or neighborhood or area is in set mode. Be ready. And for more information, go to this website. On the city website, we have an emergency management website or page where you get further instructions on where to go. The third step of that, as mentioned, is go, and that can be the messaging saying, for this community, we now need you, or we recommend that you leave because of this information. Again, we will give you more information on a website that you should be able to just click on and understand what's happening. Now, ideally, these escalating steps go in order, and there's plenty of time for you to go and do that quickly and safely and with lots of purpose. But there are times, and Flagstaff just experienced this during their wildfires, where they got a set message for a community, and then minutes later got a go message. And wildfires can move that fast, just like a flash flood can. So we're really now trying to just make sure, for those that aren't familiar with this messaging, ready, set, go, we really want them to be familiar with it. So if they do get a text or a phone call that gives them instructions on what to do, that they're familiar with it. It's really that simple. And again, for people that travel to our forested areas, they're much more common. But this same exact philosophy works for any type of emergency.
That's good to know, because as we mentioned, with the wildfire season being very more risky than it has been in the past, it's good for us to know that as a city. And as you mentioned, our Scottsdale AZ Gov site, we do have our emergency management page, which you can just type in those words in the search bar. But likely in an instance of us using this ready, set, go process, you would see alerts on our homepage with further information. So it's good for people to know about that. Troy, let's shift to something a little more fun, special events. But you might not think about emergency preparedness in terms of special events, but we want to make sure that the events we host in our city are safe for everyone who's attending. Can you talk more about special events and what we do as a city to prepare for those?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about, Holly. I don't think we do special events in Scottsdale, do we?
Just a few.
Of course we do. Yeah, we do a lot of them. We're actually well known for that, and we do some incredible events, and we have very large crowds. So Waste Management Phoenix Open is obviously our largest populated event, and it is actually one of the largest special events in the country. We can get up to 250,000 people on site on a typical Saturday there. Just in comparison, the Super Bowl, which will be held in Glendale, inside the stadium will only be 77,000 people, and they're only there for a half a day, maybe 6 hours, and maybe another 50,000 around the area. We will have nearly those same numbers at the Waste Management Open every day that we're running, which happens to be the exact same week as Super Bowl this year. We also have Barrett-Jackson, very large crowds there. It is, I believe it is the largest auto auction in the country. So we get lots of crowds there. Prado del Sol is an important event here in the city. And then there's, I'm going to say, probably hundreds of events at Westworld year round. It's consistent year round, all kinds of events from equestrian to home shows and everything else you can imagine. So we do a lot of special events, and we know those are coming ahead of time. So it's really important that we be organized and efficient in our planning for each of those. And so that's one of my niche areas and specialties is being involved with Super Bowls and NFL events and all the events that we did out in Glendale. And we're planning those same processes here. So special events are somewhat of a lifeblood for Scottsdale, because we count on tourism and we love to have the people come here, and it's beautiful, and we have lots of fun things to do with that. We want people to remember Scottsdale for that, but we have put a tremendous amount of effort. It impacts our everyday public safety resources. It impacts all of our city departments, depending on the event, impacts our traffic, all those kinds of things. But there's a lot of great things occurring in planning for those events.
Excellent. Now we talked about Ready, Set, Go, and we showed that web page, but what other resources can we go to learn more about emergency preparedness? What recommendations do you have?
I am going to share my screen once more and show you a couple of things. This one, hopefully you can all see it, is Maricopa County's emergency management page. So just like we have a City of Scottsdale emergency management page, there's one for Maricopa County. And honestly, that's kind of the hierarchy. If we have a disaster in Scottsdale, small or large, one of the first phone calls I make is to the county emergency management group and let them know that we have this going on. During a special event, as we just described, we do that ahead of time so that they are in the loop and we continually communicate with them. But at the same time, storms and floods and wildfires and all these things that we're discussing, pandemics, they don't respect jurisdictional lines. So while we're dealing with something, it's likely that other jurisdictions are dealing with it, and the county is dealing with it. So this is one of the sites you can go to. The Maricopa Region 911 system is similar, connected to the SEND system I mentioned a little bit ago. Plans for emergencies, there's Palo Verde Nuclear Plant information here. The wireless emergency alert system is what I talked about just a minute ago. It's similar to the Amber Alert. That has to be activated on your phone. As long as it's activated on a phone, you will get the messages in the affected areas. Whereas SENS, as I discussed, is an opt-in program. And there's lots of FAQs and information on here. So a lot of what you'll see on the city website, you'll also see here on Maricopa County's emergency management website. But these are tools for all of you, both our citizens and our employees. And we all work together. It's a common group of emergency management professionals that speak daily and interact constantly to make sure that the messaging is similar and useful. You can see at the top of the screen here, Extreme Heat Alert is active right now. So you could actually download this application, put it on your cell phone, and be able to get those messages instantaneously when it goes out. So heat, if you didn't know, is the leading human-caused killer out of all emergencies. So if you were to look at that from a worldwide perspective, heat is very dangerous, and we're seeing that right now as we kind of suffer this heat wave really around the globe. So that's Maricopa County's website. This next site I'm going to show you here is FEMA, and if you just Google FEMA or training.fema.gov, it will take you to this website. Everybody has access to it. There's nothing hidden here, but this is a training website, and there are hundreds of courses in here. You can take them all if you like. It's free, it costs you nothing. And I'm going to show you one. So if I were to click on this IS100.C, which is actually required for this and some others for all government employees, so we follow through to have them train on that. It will take you right to that course. You would click on the interactive web-based course here on the right. You would start the process, and in this particular one, there's 105 slides. There's videos, there's recordings in there, there's examples, there's documents, and it basically walks you through this. At the very end, you take a short exam. It's usually about 25 questions, and as long as you get, I believe it's 70%, then they will email you a certificate. And again, this is all free, and any citizen can log into the site and take any of this training. As I mentioned, it is required for us. So that's the FEMA website. There is every imaginable subject of emergency preparedness on there that you can think of. Literally, you can type in anything and search right from that site, and you will find interesting information. Always remember to read this red part up here, because their system being a federal system and with very heavy demand, it'll go down for maintenance regularly. So just make sure you check that out before you start a new course. The last one that I'm going to show you here is the National Weather Service, and they have a program called Weather Spotters. And these are basically volunteers, people that enjoy learning about weather. And you can actually get training to be a weather spotter. All of that has been put on hold for the last couple of years because of COVID. It typically was done in person. I believe they are starting to do these online now, but they will teach you all of the basics of weather spotting and understanding what's dangerous. And then they also connect you to be able to report in weather that you notice. And a lot of that stuff comes from, you'll see on the evening news weather forecasters, they'll talk about weather spotter sending information. And so this is where you can get training for that. So I think those are 3 additional websites where people can get lots of information. My goal, although I work for the city, and obviously my goal is to prepare the city and its employees, I really enjoy people taking the things that I teach them home and protect their own families and neighborhoods. And these things that we've shown you today are a lot of those resources that you can go out and find for yourself and keep yourself safe. And with that, I'll just say that it's really important that your plan not be to just call 911, because there are limited resources during emergencies, and calling 911 to have someone come help you is not always the case, especially in major emergencies. So Imagine, if every single person that had symptoms during COVID were to call 911, we wouldn't have any resources available for more significant emergencies. So that cannot be your answer. You need to plan for yourself to protect yourself and have resources on hand for you and your family.
Good point, and appreciate you sharing those additional resources. That's good for all of us to know. So with that, we have about 15 minutes left where we can answer any questions. If you have a question for Troy, you might have done such a good job explaining everything, Troy. I don't know what, what other questions we may have, but what are some of the questions that people often ask you when you're presenting? What else can you share with us today?
A lot of people ask, how I would describe it is they ask, the current topic. Like today, it would be about heat. We're seeing all the fires in Spain and Europe, and it's certainly hot across the Southwest. Most people say that they don't understand how we live here in this heat, but we just, run inside as quickly as we can, and we all live in air conditioning. Heat's the popular subject right now. I mean, you start to think about, and regardless of how you feel about the issues that are out there, the impacts of weather to us are getting much more severe. And regardless, again, of the argument, we have to be prepared for those things. So as I mentioned earlier, calling 911 is not the answer, right? At times during storms, and just a few nights ago was one of those, there was fire apparatus going all the way across the valley from different jurisdictions. Now our system is built to do that, but it extends their response times. So again, being prepared for not only what is going on currently, which in this case is heat in the middle of the summer for us, but be prepared for those other things that we've discussed: flooding, pandemic, illness, power outages, drought, right? That's a major topic that we're all considering here now in the Southwest, because drought is becoming a common topic for us to discuss. Having those plans for yourself and your family are important ahead of time. I believe the best way is to remind yourself when the current emergency, again in this case heat, is occurring, what was my plan? Is it a good plan? Do I have all of the necessary supplies and concepts? And is everybody in my family prepared to respond appropriately? And just continually do that year round. If it's monsoon season, then discuss that with your family. If it's heavy rains that are occurring, then discuss flooding. If it's, you hear about cyber issues going on in the world, or some effective communication system, discuss those things. And a lot of people here will tease me that I don't ever have good news, but I'm a planner, and I want to teach people to think ahead and plan for themselves so that the impacts are not as great. So that would be the best advice I get. It's a different topic every time I speak, and depending on the audience that comes up, but just be prepared is the best advice you can take.
Okay, and we have a couple of questions coming in now. Is there any training for active shooter scenarios?
There is, and that's typically a subject that I like the law enforcement folks to address. So they will, quite often, Scottsdale PD will be invited out to have conversations about that. One of the tools that is often talked about is run, hide, fight. And you can Google run, hide, fight, and they'll give you lots of information about options for you when you're in that type of situation. The bottom line, generally speaking, from an emergency responder background, is get away from whatever is occurring. Now, even if that's something that appears very minor at the beginning, it does, it could potentially escalate. So protect your family, get out of that situation, and get away from it. That's the most important thing. But again, doing nothing or just calling 911, although calling 911 is very, very important, waiting for them to give you instructions is just not fast enough for some situations, and that might be one of them.
Great, thank you. This question is from Karen Sutherland. She appreciates your words about preparing and not dialing 911 unless you are injured or sick or need public safety assistance. But bailing out of the communication center has been a concern for her. Have we ever considered teaming up with another agency or a city to put together an evacuation center in case we have to leave our communication center due to a storm or a fire?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Karen. We work together quite a bit, and I'm glad she saw that as helping protect their important resources. We actually, the city of Scottsdale is actually a backup emergency operations center for the county and the state EOC, and both of those are just down the road. We actually are their next closest facility, so they could come here if they have an emergency. That applies for us too. So we could go to their emergency operations center. Now, the 911 system, obviously there are procedures and things in place that Karen probably could speak to far better than I ever could. But there are lots of backup systems out there, and they need to be reviewed. They need to be tested. They need to be rewritten and updated and practiced. And so that goes for all of these things, right? And that's really, I think, the mission of this particular episode of the show is think ahead, so you're not caught, without a plan or without the tools and resources that you need during an emergency. So that same thing goes for 911 centers, right? We have continuity. It's called a COOP plan, or continuity of operations plans, across the city, and every department is required to put those together. And they're basically determining what is their plan during this type of emergency. Where would they go? What would they need to take with them? What kind of contracts or contacts do they have in place that would help support them getting through that emergency? And that includes other facilities to move things to. So I encourage certainly all of our employees to talk to their supervisors about the COOP plan, and they can get involved and work on that stuff. And it's actually all electronic. It's online, and it's very easy to learn and participate in.
Okay, excellent. Well, I don't see any other questions, so unless one pops up, we might wrap up here just a few minutes early, but we do appreciate your time today, Troy, and also thank you to everyone attending today. We hope you've learned more about our ongoing emergency planning efforts and how you can prepare. This session was our final class in the Scottsdale 360 series. Thank you for joining us, and Troy, thank you for sharing that information.
Thank you, Holly. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.